The Airbnb founders sold cereal boxes for $40 each. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia were completely broke in 2008, drowning in credit card debt, while trying to get Airbnb off the ground. They had maxed out their credit cards, were eating Dollarama noodles for every meal, and investors kept rejecting their crazy idea of letting strangers sleep in your house. Then the 2008 presidential election happened. In a moment of desperate creativity, they bought cheap cereal in bulk, designed custom boxes called Obama O's and Captain McCain's, and sold them for $40 each outside the Democratic National Convention. People thought they were insane. Who pays $40 for $5 worth of cereal? But it worked. They sold over 500 boxes and made enough money to keep the lights on for another few months. More importantly, this stunt caught the attention of investors who realized these guys would literally do anything to make their business work. That cereal money kept them alive long enough to eventually build Airbnb into a company worth over $100 billion. Sometimes, desperation breeds the most creative solutions. The boxes of cereal they didn't sell are now displayed in their corporate headquarters as a reminder that even the craziest ideas can save your business when you're willing to hustle harder than everyone else thinks is reasonable. Jan Koum was on food stamps before selling WhatsApp for $19 billion. Jan Koum immigrated to California from Ukraine when he was 16, speaking no English and living with his mother in a small apartment. They were so poor they qualified for food stamps and government assistance. His mother worked as a babysitter, while Jan taught himself computer programming by reading discarded manuals he found in dumpsters behind tech companies. For years he worked as a janitor at a grocery store, while going to college and learning to code in his spare time. After college, he got a job at Yahoo, but even then, he was just another programmer in a sea of thousands. Nothing about his story seemed destined for massive wealth. Then in 2009, he bought an iPhone and realized the App Store was going to change everything. He spent months building a simple messaging app that would let people send texts without paying carrier fees. He called it WhatsApp, named after the phrase, "What's up?" The app was so simple it seemed almost stupid. No fancy features, no games, no social media integration, just messaging that worked reliably across different phones and countries. But that simplicity was genius. While other companies built complicated platforms, WhatsApp focused on solving one problem perfectly. 5 years later, Facebook bought WhatsApp for $19 billion, making Jan Koum worth over $7 billion overnight. The man who once used food stamps to eat became one of the richest immigrants in American history, all because he understood that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most valuable. Sarah Blakely cut the feet off pantyhose and built a billion-dollar empire. Sarah Blakely was selling fax machines door-to-door in Florida, making just $50,000 a year at age 27. She had no business experience, no fashion background, and definitely no money to start a company. But she had one frustrating problem that millions of women shared. Every time she wore white pants or form-fitting clothing, she couldn't find the right undergarment. Pantyhose were too hot and had feet that showed through open-toe shoes. Regular underwear created visible lines. So one night, in a moment of frustration, she took scissors and cut the feet off a pair of control-top pantyhose. The result was perfect: smooth lines, no visible underwear, and comfortable to wear. She knew she had stumbled onto something, but she had no idea how to turn it into a business. She spent 2 years researching the hosiery industry, driving to mills in North Carolina, and getting rejected by manufacturer after manufacturer. Finally, a mill owner's daughters convinced him to take a chance on Sarah's idea. She invested her life savings of $5,000, came up with the name Spanx, and started selling her products to department stores. She literally drove from store to store, demonstrating the product on herself in dressing rooms. Oprah Winfrey discovered Spanx and named it one of her favorite things. Overnight, Sarah went from unknown entrepreneur to running a company doing millions in revenue. Today, Spanx is worth over $1 billion, and Sarah Blakely became the world's youngest female billionaire at the time, all because she was willing to cut up pantyhose and wasn't afraid to show strangers her underwear. The pet rock made Gary Dahl a millionaire in 6 months. In 1975, Gary Dahl was sitting in a bar in California, listening to his friends complain about their pets. Dogs were too much work, cats were too independent, fish died too easily. As a joke, Gary said the perfect pet would be a rock. It wouldn't need food, water, walking, or veterinary care. His friends laughed, but Gary couldn't stop thinking about it. What if he actually sold pet rocks? The idea was so ridiculous, it might actually work. He spent the next few weeks developing the concept, writing a 32-page training manual called The Care and Training of Your Pet Rock. The manual was hilarious, with instructions on how to teach your rock to sit, stay, and roll over. It included tips on housebreaking your pet rock and what to do if it became aggressive. Gary packaged each rock in a cardboard pet carrier with air holes, complete with a bed of straw. He priced each pet rock at $3.95, essentially charging $4 for a regular beach stone and a funny booklet. Everyone thought he was crazy. Rock shops wouldn't carry them because they weren't real rocks. Pet stores rejected them because they weren't real pets. But when a newspaper reporter wrote about the pet rock as a humorous human interest story, orders started pouring in. Within 6 months, Gary had sold over 1 million pet rocks, making him a millionaire before Christmas. The fad lasted only about 6 months, but that was long enough to prove that sometimes the most successful products are the ones that make no logical sense whatsoever. The pet rock craze taught the business world that marketing and packaging could be more valuable than the actual product, a lesson that influences advertising and product development to this day. Howard Schultz turned coffee into liquid gold. Howard Schultz grew up in a Brooklyn housing project, watching his father work blue-collar jobs that barely paid enough to survive. When his father broke his ankle and lost his job, with no health insurance, young Howard vowed he would build a company that treated employees better than his father had been treated. In 1981, Howard was selling kitchen equipment when he noticed a small coffee company in Seattle was buying an unusual amount of his products. Curious, he flew to Seattle to meet the owners of Starbucks, which at the time was just a small retailer selling coffee beans and equipment, not drinks. During that trip, Howard fell in love with the coffee culture. But the Starbucks owners weren't interested in serving drinks or expanding beyond Seattle. So Howard left to start his own coffee company called Il Giornale, serving espresso drinks Italian style. The problem was, Americans in the 1980s thought espresso was too strong and weird. Howard's shops were failing because people didn't understand the products. He was running out of money and facing bankruptcy when he got the chance to buy Starbucks from the original owners. Howard took a massive risk, borrowing money he didn't have to purchase Starbucks for $3.8 million. He bet everything that he could teach Americans to love expensive coffee drinks. Everyone thought he was insane. Why would Americans pay $3 for coffee when they could get it for 50 cents at a diner? But Howard understood something others didn't. He wasn't just selling coffee, he was selling an experience, a third place between work and home where people could relax and feel sophisticated. He trained baristas to remember customers' names and favorite drinks, created comfortable seating areas, and made each location feel like a neighborhood gathering place. Today, Starbucks has over 30,000 locations worldwide and generates over $30 billion in annual revenue. Howard Schultz became a billionaire by convincing people that coffee could be a luxury experience worth paying premium prices for, proving that sometimes the most successful businesses take ordinary products and make them extraordinary.
Reed Hastings paid late fees and destroyed Blockbuster. Reed Hastings was a successful software entrepreneur in the 1990s, but he wasn't particularly interested in the entertainment industry. That changed in 1997 when he rented Apollo 13 from Blockbuster, forgot to return it on time, and got hit with a $40 late fee that was more expensive than buying the movie. Standing in that Blockbuster store, holding his overpriced late fee receipt, Reed had an idea that would eventually destroy the entire video rental industry. What if there were no late fees? What if you could rent movies through the mail and keep them as long as you wanted? Everyone told Reed his idea was stupid. The mail was too slow, people wanted instant gratification, and Blockbuster was too powerful to compete with. Reed's own investors thought he was wasting money on a business model that couldn't possibly work in the real world. But Reed understood something that Blockbuster didn't. Convenience was worth more than instant gratification. He launched Netflix in 1998, offering DVD rentals by mail with no late fees, no due dates, and a flat monthly subscription price. The early days were brutal. Netflix was losing money on every transaction because shipping costs were higher than rental fees. Reed nearly went bankrupt multiple times and even approached Blockbuster about selling Netflix for $50 million. Blockbuster executives literally laughed at him and said no. But Reed kept improving the service, using algorithms to recommend movies and building distribution centers across the country to speed up delivery. When broadband internet became common, he made another bet that seemed insane, streaming video over the internet when most people thought it was impossible. Netflix eventually became worth over $200 billion, while Blockbuster went bankrupt. Reed Hastings became a billionaire because he was willing to pay attention to his own frustrations and believed that other people shared those same frustrations, even when industry experts said he was wrong.
Mark Cuban sold his company right before the dot-com crash. Mark Cuban was a bartender in Dallas in the early 1980s, getting fired from job after job because he was more interested in making deals than following his boss's rules. He was so broke he shared a 6-man apartment and ate mustard and ketchup sandwiches for dinner. In 1983, Mark got fired from a computer software store for making a sale when he was supposed to be cleaning instead. Instead of looking for another job, he decided to start his own computer consulting company called Micro Solutions with a $1,000 loan. Mark taught himself about computers by reading manuals and experimenting with different systems. He worked 20-hour days, sleeping in his office and cold-calling businesses to sell computer solutions. Within 7 years, he had built Micro Solutions into a $6 million company and sold it to CompuServe. But Mark's real genius came in the late 1990s when he co-founded Broadcast.com, a company that streamed audio and video over the internet when most people still used dial-up modems. Everyone said streaming was impossible with existing technology, but Mark believed the internet would eventually be fast enough to make it work. The company was hemorrhaging money, burning through millions of dollars while generating minimal revenue. Most dot-com companies were losing money, but investors kept funding them anyway because everyone believed the internet would eventually be profitable. In 1999, at the height of dot-com mania, Yahoo offered to buy Broadcast.com for $5.7 billion in Yahoo stock. Mark's advisors told him to negotiate for a higher price, but Mark had a gut feeling that the dot-com bubble was about to burst. He accepted Yahoo's offer immediately and sold his company for the largest internet acquisition in history at that time. 6 months later, the dot-com crash began, and Yahoo's stock price collapsed by over 90%. If Mark had waited or negotiated for more money, he would have lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Instead, his perfect timing made him worth over $1 billion and allowed him to buy the Dallas Mavericks basketball team. Mark Cuban became a billionaire not just because he built a successful company, but because he had the wisdom to sell at exactly the right moment when everyone else was getting greedy.
Oprah Winfrey turned trauma into a media empire. Oprah Winfrey was born into poverty in rural Mississippi to a teenage mother, wearing dresses made from potato sacks because her family couldn't afford real clothes. She was sexually abused by relatives and family friends, ran away from home multiple times, and gave birth to a premature baby at 14 who died shortly after birth. By all statistical measures, Oprah should have remained trapped in the cycle of poverty and abuse that defined her early life. Instead, she discovered that she had an extraordinary gift for connecting with people through storytelling and authentic conversation. At 19, Oprah became the youngest news anchor and first black female news anchor at Nashville's WLAC-TV. But she was terrible at traditional news reporting because she was too emotional. She would cry during tragic stories and celebrate during happy ones, violating every rule of objective journalism. Instead of trying to fix her emotional problem, Oprah embraced it. When she moved to Chicago to host a struggling morning talk show called AM Chicago, she transformed it by making herself vulnerable on air. She talked about her own struggles with weight, relationships, and self-esteem in ways that no television host had ever done before. Within months, AM Chicago became the highest-rated talk show in Chicago, beating even Phil Donahue's nationally syndicated show. The show was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show and went national in 1986. But Oprah's real breakthrough came when she realized she could use her platform to help other people transform their lives the same way she had transformed hers. She created Oprah's Book Club, turning unknown authors into bestsellers overnight. She interviewed celebrities in ways that revealed their humanity rather than just their glamour. The Oprah Winfrey Show ran for 25 years and generated over $4 billion in revenue. Oprah became the first black female billionaire in history and built a media empire that includes her own television network, magazine, and production company. Oprah Winfrey became a billionaire by refusing to hide her pain and instead using it to help millions of other people heal their own trauma. She proved that authenticity and vulnerability could be more powerful than perfection and detachment.
The Collison brothers became billionaires before age 30. Patrick and John Collison grew up in rural Ireland, where their parents ran a small bed and breakfast. As teenagers, they were fascinated by computers and the internet, teaching themselves programming by reading books and experimenting with code. In 2007, when Patrick was just 19 and John was 17, they launched their first company called Automatic, which helped small businesses build websites. They sold the company for $5 million to a Canadian firm, making them millionaires before they could legally drink in the United States. But the brothers were frustrated by how difficult it was to accept payments online. Every time they tried to process credit card payments for their websites, they had to deal with complicated banking relationships, lengthy approval processes, and clunky technical integration that took weeks to implement. In 2009, they decided to solve this problem by creating Stripe, a company that would make online payments as simple as adding a few lines of code to any website. The idea seemed almost too simple. Most payment companies made money by being complicated and charging high fees for their complexity. The brothers moved to Silicon Valley, with no connections, no prestigious university degrees, and no experience running a payments company. Banks and investors initially dismissed them as too young and inexperienced to handle something as regulated and complex as financial transactions. But Stripe's simplicity was revolutionary. Developers could integrate Stripe payments in minutes instead of weeks, The fees were transparent and reasonable. Customer service was responsive and helpful. Word spread quickly among programmers who were tired of dealing with traditional payment processes. Major companies like Lyft, Shopify, and thousands of other businesses started using Stripe because it made their lives easier. By making payments simpler, the Collison brothers enabled countless other entrepreneurs to start online businesses without technical barriers. Today, Stripe processes over $600 billion in transactions annually and is valued at over $90 billion. Patrick and John Collison each became billionaires before age 30 by solving a problem so fundamental that millions of businesses needed their solution. The Collison brothers proved that age and credentials matter less than understanding real problems and building elegant solutions that make other people's lives easier.
Richard Branson started with a student magazine and built an empire. Richard Branson was a dyslexic teenager who struggled in school and had no interest in traditional academic success. At 16, he dropped out of high school to start a student magazine called Student, which focused on youth issues and counterculture topics that mainstream media ignored. Richard had no money, no office, and no experience in publishing. He worked from the crypt of a church, sleeping on the floor and surviving on cereal and milk. The magazine lost money for years because Richard gave away most copies for free and spent whatever revenue came in on making the next issue better. But Richard learned something important from the magazine business. He discovered he had a talent for creating excitement around brands and making customers feel like they were part of something special rather than just buying a product. When the magazine was struggling financially, Richard started selling records by mail to generate revenue. He realized that young people wanted to buy music but were frustrated by high prices and limited selection in traditional record stores. So in 1971, he opened Virgin Records as a discount record store. Virgin Records was different from other music retailers. Richard treated it like a lifestyle brand instead of just a store. He signed controversial musicians that other labels wouldn't touch, created a rebellious brand image, and made customers feel like buying Virgin Records was a statement about their identity. The record business led to Virgin Atlantic Airline, where Richard applied the same principles. Take an industry dominated by boring, expensive companies and inject personality, better service, and competitive pricing. He painted his planes red, hired attractive flight attendants, and challenged British Airways' monopoly on transatlantic flights. Virgin expanded into mobile phones, space travel, health clubs, and dozens of other industries. Richard Branson became a billionaire not by becoming an expert in any single industry, but by understanding that customers wanted companies to treat them as individuals rather than statistics. Daniel Ek made music free and became a billionaire. Daniel Ek was a 7-year-old in Stockholm when he got his first computer and immediately became obsessed with programming. By age 14, he was making more money from building websites than his teachers earned. But he was also watching the music industry destroy itself, fighting illegal downloading. In the early 2000s, music piracy was rampant. Napster, Kazaa, and BitTorrent made it easy for anyone to download entire music collections for free. Record labels were suing customers, shutting down websites, and trying to stop piracy through legal threats instead of offering better alternatives. Daniel realized that people weren't pirating music because they wanted to steal. They were doing it because legal alternatives were inconvenient and expensive. iTunes required downloading individual songs for 99 cents each. CDs were $20 for 12 songs. There was no legal way to access unlimited music affordably. In 2006, Daniel started working on Spotify, a streaming service that would give users access to millions of songs for a monthly subscription fee. Record labels hated the idea because it meant lower revenue per song. Tech investors were skeptical because previous streaming services had failed.
The breakthrough came when Daniel figured out how to make Spotify free for users while still paying artists. He would offer both free streaming with advertisements and premium subscriptions without ads. Free users would eventually upgrade to premium to remove ads and get additional features. Daniel spent 3 years negotiating with record labels, convincing them that legal streaming would generate more revenue than fighting piracy. He demonstrated that Spotify users actually bought more music than non-users because the service helped them discover new artists. When Spotify launched in 2008, it immediately became popular because it solved the music industry's biggest problem. It was easier to use Spotify legally than to pirate music illegally. Users could access any song instantly without downloading files or worrying about viruses. Today, Spotify has over 400 million users worldwide and generates over $11 billion in annual revenue. Daniel Ek became a billionaire by understanding that the best way to compete with free is to make the legal alternative more convenient than the illegal one. Daniel Ek proved that sometimes the most successful business strategy is to give customers what they want at a price they're willing to pay, even when entire industries insist it's impossible.